Problem at all.
So
So I've just started the live stream on YouTube so that you can start your presentation now.
okay, so I can stop the video and start the presentation.
Problem at all.
So okay. So I want to share my screen. Okay.
We can see it now.
Yeah, okay. So starting with my presentation. I will first give brief introduction. I am Ahmed Shafi'i, a senior Reservoir engineer at Khadda Petroleum Company. I have been working at Khadda for 12 years. I have experience in oil reservoirs, in gas reservoir, and I have like 7 or 8 experience in reservoir simulation. Um, so today we're just going to do some like brief introduction and discussion related to the PVT. So is this like an interactive presentation so everybody can share or interact, or just me delivering the presentation? Okay, so just let's deliver the presentation. So first, why do we need a PVT? Okay, so I think when it's come to basics, you should first realize why we do things. So why do we need the PVT data? So basically, the fluid's properties changes with pressure and time. Okay, when you have the reservoir conditions, you have fluids in a certain conditions. Then you go to the surf through the tubing in the production conditions change, so the properties of the fluid change. Then you go to the surface, so you have also your properties change. So you want to track the different properties of the fluids at different conditions. So we need the PVT to relate to fluid conditions at different instances. So whether you are in the reservoir, at the reservoir conditions, you have like certain characteristics of fluid, to the volumes of the fluid. Once you go through the tubing, you might start having like multi-phase flow, and the volumes change, the viscosity change. Then you go to the surface. When you go to the surface, you go to the through the production system, then you go to the standard conditions, the tanks. If we're talking about oil, you have stock tank oil. Um, you count your production as the surface condition in the tanks, and you want to relate these volumes to the downhole. So if you have a material balance, you're doing reservoir simulation or any calculations or even volumetrics related to the or anything that's related to the reservoir or anything related to the reservoir engineering, you want to correlate your surface productions to what you have in the reservoir. So let's say that you produce a certain volume, 2 barrels from the reservoir. If you have and this barrel shrank to only 1 barrel in your stock tank in your produced oil due to the liberated gas and the change of the conditions from the downhole to the surface. So you want to, when you want to estimate the volume in the reservoir, you count the in your production system this 1 barrel, and you want to correlate it to the reservoir volume. So you resort to using the beta O to correlate the surface volume to the downhole volume. That's only one example of the importance of the PVT. And you must keep this in mind when we talk about different tests and different properties. And it will be relatable to why we do um, everything. Okay. So a brief summary on the fluid types. So this is the PT diagram. Okay. As you see in the PT diagram, we have here the bubble point curve. This is the dew point curve. The bubble point and the dew point curve intersect as the critical point. So when you are at the left of this is single phase area, and below, inside the phase envelope, we have the multi-phase area. Inside the phase envelope, we have both liquid and gas. So if your initial conditions of the reservoir lies in that area, you have an oil, you have a liquid in the reservoir. If you have your initial conditions of the reservoir lying in that area, then you have gas in the reservoir. Uh, 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 you see, this is called the critical point. The critical point is a point where both oil and gas tends to have like similar properties. As oil approaches the critical point, it becomes more volatile, which means has higher gas content, a higher shrinkage factor. So as we go to the critical point, close we have like the oil tends to be more volatile. Um, from the gas side, as we also go to the critical point, as we are closer to the critical point, we tend to have more condensate in the gas. Okay, so initially we have like our oil, which is a single phase flow, is a single, just only a single phase. As we deplete the reservoir, the pressure keeps decreasing until we reach the bubble point. Then we start liberating gas in the reservoir. Okay, as you go to the left, the amount of gas would be decreased. As you go to the right, the amount of gas closest to critical, the amount of the gas would increase. Okay. For the gas reservoirs, we have three classes of gas reservoirs. Dry gas, which is by definition gases that doesn't have condensate in the reservoir, or as in the reservoir condition or as surface condition. We have wet gas, okay, which are basically reservoirs that doesn't have gas condensate in the reservoir, but might have some condensate as the surface conditions. Like this is the A dash here represents the surface conditions. Okay, and we have a condensate or retrograde condensate reservoirs. For retrograde condensate reservoirs, we start as we start as a gas phase, but as with the pressure decreases, we cut the pressure reaches catches the dew point curve, so we start having some liquid in the reservoir, and as we have continuous depletion, okay, um, the condensate increases, then it starts revaporizing again. These lines are called quality lines. okay, which represents the percentage of the liquid. So as you hear, we start having, in this case, in fluid B, like 10% liquid. Then liquid starts revaporizing again, and the liquid content in the reservoir decreases. So actually, in real life, there is nothing called, there is no real wet and dry gas. All fluids or gases are condensates unless they are purely methane. Uh, but it's a sort of approximating assumption. So if you have the condensate very, very low, if you have a GOR of 100,000, for example, or more, we consider it practically as dry gas, which is just an approximation. If you have a gas condensate, if you have that's have like GR of 50,000 plus and very, very low gas content, we can practically um, treat it as a wet gas if the GR is less than that or the CGR is higher, because the CGR is the gas condensate to gas ratio, which is the opposite of the GUR. Then we treat it as a proper gas condensate. So the difference in it is how you handle the PVT in all of this. In all the different cases, for dry and wet gas, we have only composition. We do some tests in the case of gas condensate reservoirs. For the oil, post black and the volatile oil, we have like the called CCE and the CCE and differential tests, also separator tests. But the main difference that volatile oil tends to have a much higher beta O, a much higher GOR. It loses a significant amount of the gas of its volume to the gas, and this is will be elaborated later. So this is just a summary of the type of fluids that we have. Okay, so um, now I would like to go briefly through a PVT report. I will focus mainly on oil, um, on an oil case. Okay, so this is a PVT report, as you see. Okay, this is a surface recombined sample. Okay, so you have two different
Hello,
types.
Engineer Ahmed.
Okay, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Are you trying to illustrate it on Excel sheet, or you are using the PowerPoint?
Oh,
Because we
okay,
can't
okay, I'm
see
sorry.
any other file than the PowerPoint.
Okay, okay, so I just change the sharing.
Yes, please.
Okay, uh, okay, share. Okay, so is it shared now? Is it
No, we
shared
can't
now?
see it. No, 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 we can't see it.
Okay, wait for 1 minute, please. Entire screen, share. Is it shared?
I think it's bugged. Yeah, yeah, it's loading. We can see it now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is a PVT report. Okay. Okay. So this is the PVT report. Okay. So we have two types of samples. We have surface samples and we have downhole samples. For surface, we take the sample from the separator. We take a gas sample from the gas from the outlet of the gas in the separator, in the surface separator. We take an oil sample from the oil outlet in the surface separator, in the liquid outlet, and we remix these samples we remix these samples in the lab with the test GUR. So let's say that in this case we have an oil the oil rate, we have the gas rate, and we have the GOR of the production. So basically we mix these samples using the ratio, the measured gas oil ratio in the feed. We do some corrections to this measurement to this GOR, but basically this is how it's done. Um, we so usually it depends, it's case by case basis, but if you have a higher GR fluid, we tend to take the surface sample to avoid multi-phase flow. If you take if you take a downhole sample, if you have a black oil sample, especially if it's low in the GOR, it will be very challenging to measure the field GR, because for the separator test, for the production separators, as the gas rate decreases, it becomes more and more difficult to estimate the value of the field GR. So in this case, if the GR is 100, for example, or if we have a GR of 50 instead of 500 or 497, the gas rate would have been 0.03, which is not measurable practically. For or even if it's measured, the margin of error will be quite high. So for this case, we would prefer to go for a downhole sample. On the other hand, if you have a GR of 2000, it's usually a downhole sample will be more challenging because of the multi-phase flow. And we will tend to take a surface sample like this one. So what we do is that we take 3 bottles of oil from the liquid outlet, and we take 3 bottles of gas from the gas outlet. So when we do that, we should have a stable production conditions. So if you have a fluctuations in the GOR on the production in the test, the sample won't be representative. You want like a steady state conditions in the production system. So you need to have like to produce a small choke to have a stable production. For a while, you shouldn't have any changes in the fluid levels in the separator when you take the sample. Okay. You shouldn't have so basically the whole system should be steady state, and the liquid and the gas in the separator should be in equilibrium. What does that mean? Because the system is not in equilibrium, there will be some gas in the liquid that wants to go to the um, liquid phase, or the opposite is there will be some oil droplets in the gas in separator that wants to go to the liquid phase. So there will be changing conditions in the separator. You should have like a steady conditions in the separator. So one of the KFCs that we do is that we compare, for gas sample, we compare the opening pressure of the bottles of the gas with the separator conditions. So as you see here, for the 3 bottles, the pressure is quite close. Okay, so we have here a separator pressure of 160 psi. We have here the opening pressure of 157, but it's a little bit less for 2 samples and it's higher in 1 sample. So a reason for the gas to be higher, for this sample is to be higher, that if you transport the sample, then you do some agitations, this might increase the pressure a little bit. So if you are going to select a good sample to be used for the recombination, probably I would use that sample, the first one. For the oil, we do a little bit different. We measure the bubble point of the liquid sample. It is not the bubble point of the reservoir fluid. It's the bubble point of the liquid in the separator. So you must remember that the separator has a higher pressure than the standard condition. So let's say that we have the pressure here is 160 psi. That means that there is some gas that is still dissolved in the separator liquid. This gas wants to be needs to be separated from this liquid. Um, so this fluid, this separator liquid, has a power point of its own. There is some additional gas. If we decrease the pressure, this gas will be separated, and this is called also the tank gas. Okay, so uh, because we assume that the separator is in equilibrium condition, what does it mean? It is in equilibrium condition. It means that the oil is at its bubble point and the gas in the separator is at dew point. Basically, if you make any change in the condition, so if you decrease the pressure of the separator 1 psi, some additional gas will be liberated. So if we are consistent, if our assumption is correct, you should measure the bubble point of the liquid in the separator and find it similar to the separator pressure. And for this case, as you see here, that's like the bubble point is 157 psi compared to 160 psi. We have a 3 psi difference. So it's fine. Yeah, it's a little bit different, but it's a little bit, but it's close enough. So it's 158. So either select this one or that one. Okay. So that's for the selection of the sample. When we take the sample, um, we do some correction for the GUR. Basically, the measurements of the field GUR, okay, has some errors due to the measurement method in the field. We measure the actual specific gravity of the gas in the lab and use that value to correct the GUR a little bit. So the GUR might get it changed, a little bit. Okay. Uh, you see here, this is like the sampling GUR. Okay. This is the additional dissolved GUR. Okay. So now, once we have, or actually it's before we have a sample, we start doing the test. Okay, so at first, before I'm sorry about remixing the sample, we start doing the test. So the first thing that we measure is the composition. Okay. After the mix, we do the CCE, the differential, and the separator test. So this is a summary table. We'll go back to this later. So we'll start with the composition. So the composition actually is done before we do the remixing. Okay. So first we measure the gas composition. So the composition is measured using the chromograph. Okay. The chromograph, we have gas chromograph and we have liquid chromograph. So for gas chromograph, we just pause the gas, use the gas sample in the chromograph and measure the composition, like this case. So you have here the different components. This is a molecular weight, and this is the separator gas. We measure the separator gas directly. Okay. For the liquid, it's a little bit challenging. So in the industry, we don't have a chromatograph that measures the composition of the oil of the liquid at the reservoir conditions or at the separator conditions, or the chromatograph that we have just measures the composition at the standard conditions. So in order to measure the composition, what we need to do is we want to get the oil and the gas or the oil that we have into the standard conditions first, then we start measuring the composition. So, but our gas is our oil, I'm sorry, was sampled at a separator condition. Just it has some gas dissolved in it at that condition. So what we do is that we release the gas that's dissolved in the oil sample. We measure. When we release the gas, we have a dissolved gas, which is basically the gas that we get when we remove that when you go to the tank conditions, to the stock tank, and we have the stock tank oil, which we measure the composition for. So we have the liquid composition for the stock tank oil. We have the gas that was dissolved in the oil. We recombine these compositions mathematically, okay? So yeah, using the GOR of the flashed gas, like this GOR, okay? We use this GOR this ratio to generate or calculate the liquid composition. Then in another step, we recombine the separator gas and separator liquid mathematically to calculate the well stream or the reservoir fluid composition. In this case, we use that GOR, which was measured in the field. So basically what we do is that we measure the separate compositions for oil and gas, then use the GOR to calculate the average reservoir composition. Why we do this? Because we cannot measure the reservoir composition directly as in one step, because as there is no chromatograph that can, at least in the industry, as we know of, that measures the composition at the reservoir conditions. All what we have just measures at the standard conditions. So we need to get everything at the standard conditions, oil and gas, measure at the standard conditions, and recombine that mathematically. Once we go, once we finish the composition, okay, we actually is something that's related to compositions that I want to highlight, which is Hoffman plot. So okay, I can get to that later. I believe it was no, it's not in that report. Okay, we can get to Hoffman plot later. So now let's get through the recombination. We recombine the oil and gas samples based on the GR that we have, and now we have a recombined sample. For this recombined sample, the first test is the CCE, or the constant composition test. Okay, so basically, we start by putting our fluid at the initial reservoir conditions, or a little bit above the initial reservoir conditions, of course, at the reservoir temperature. We start decreasing the pressure gradually. For each step of the pressure decrease, we have an increase in the volume. So we have a little bit of expansion in the volume um, as the pressure is released. At a certain pressure, we start having gas. This pressure is the bubble point pressure. As we go below the bubble point, we start the volume of the gas start to increase, and the volume of the liquid decrease. Why the volume of the liquid decrease? Because some of this liquid volume is transformed into gas. Okay, so this is reflected here in the table. We have something that's called relative volume. Basically, the relative volume is the ratio between the volume of the cell at any of these conditions to the volume of the cell, of the liquid in the cell, at um, the bubble point. So the maximum volume for the liquid is at the bubble point. So you see here the relative volume. Okay. So this is the relative volume. Like starts in a value below less than one, then we have the volume increase until we reach the maximum value at the bubble point. Below the bubble point, we have the both oil and volume gas, oil and gas volumes. So above the bubble point, this reflects the beta O value. Below the bubble point, this reflects the beta total value. Okay. So again, this table we have here in this table, this calculated from the CCE. We measured the relative volume. If we multiplied the relative volume at any pressure by the formation volume factor at the bubble point, we get the formation volume factor at that pressure. Okay. Is it clear? Okay. So now so okay. So first, you see here, this is also the beta O curve, the formation volume factor curve. We start at these pressures. As the pressure decreases, the formation volume factor increases. Then the oil starts to shrink as we go below the bubble point, because it loses some of the volume to the gas phase. Okay. We get the values for the formation volume factor, which represents the ratio between the volume of the reservoir condition to the volume at the surface condition. We get that from the CCE. Below the bubble point, we get it from the differential test. So going back to the differential test. So the first test was called a constant composition expansion or constant mass expansion, because we don't have to remove anything from the cell. This test is done for both oil and the gas condensate reservoirs. The second test is a differential test. In the differential test, we start at the bubble point. Then we decrease the pressure. Some gas is liberated. We remove this liberated gas from the cell. So we have only liquid at that step. We measure the liberated gas volume. Okay. Then we decrease the pressure again. As the pressure is decreased, some additional gas is liberated. We then remove this liberated gas. We measure this gas volume and we measure the liquid volume. So basically, we do this until we go to the atmospheric pressure. So first thing, we measure two things. As we measure the oil volume, okay, uh, basically you can you can calculate the beta O. So basically, this is the oil volume at this condition. You compare it to the oil volume at the standard conditions, then you have your beta O. So you have this is the beta O represents the beta O curve. For the gas, you measure the you you measure the gas volume that's liberated, and you sum your gas at the end, so you have your total GR. Basically, if I removed a certain volume of gas at this point and another volume of gas at that point, and then keep counting, I can estimate or calculate the amount of gas that has been dissolved in the oil. So basically, this is how we measure our GOR. So now we have beta O values below the bubble point, and we have our RS curve. Okay, so basically the formation volume factor represents the ratio between the volumes at any conditions of the oil volume and the oil volume at the surface condition. Remember that we always count our production at the surface conditions. So if you want to convert this surface production uh, to back calculate the volume at any condition, whether it's in the reservoir initially or at any instance, you need to use the beta O value. Basically, having a beta O of like of 1.49 means that when you count a single barrel of oil in your tank, and if the initial pressure was 4,000 psi, or your volume was basically 1.49. If your initial pressure was like 5,500 psi, your volume, your stock tank, your every single barrel that you counted uh, is corresponding to 1.43 barrels in the reservoir. So this is very critical in the reservoir calculation, volumetrics. It's very important in the material balance, reservoir simulation, basically any reservoir engineering calculations. Also, there is something that you need to pay attention. That also we need also the trend of the beta O curve is very important, because this basically represents the oil compressibility. So if you have a very gentle slope for this line for the beta O curve, it means that you have a low oil compressibility. Um, this is the oil compressibility is actually calculated in the first table. So the oil compressibility is basically your the change in the beta O per change of pressure. Um, Change of volume, because it's change of volume per change of pressure. If we have um, a steep beta O curve, you have a higher oil compressibility. So if you have a reservoir that's producing under depletion drive, if you don't have an aquifer, or you have a weak aquifer, this would affect your material balance calculation significantly. I have seen errors up to 100% or more in the material balance calculations due to errors in the slope of this curve. So if you have, especially if you use the correlations to estimate your beta O curves. Okay, for the RS, the RS curves represents the amount of gas, the amount of gas uh, dissolved in the oil. So basically, having an RS of 600 and 20 um, means that there is a 600 when you go with your gas, with your oil to the standard condition, 620 standard cubic feet of gas per single stock tank barrel of oil of oil will be liberated for each barrel of oil. So this represents the total amount of gas that is dissolved. So as you decrease the pressure at each of these steps, there is some gas that's liberated and some gas that's still in solution. So the gas that's liberated um, just goes into the reservoir of it. If we are in the production like string, it goes in through the production tank, whatever it becomes like a free gas, and there is some amount that's still dissolved in at 1500 psi. We have 500 standard cubic feet that's still dissolved, etc. And as the pressure decreases, the amount of the gas that's still dissolved also decreases. So that's for the CCE and the differential. Finally, we have the viscosity measurements. For the viscosity measurements, the viscosity is measured in the lab using viscometers. For oil, I will measure it physically using the viscometer at the reservoir conditions. For gas, we the viscosity is very difficult to measure in the lab. Labs in the world that can do this. On the other hand, the
Okay.
correlations. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm
Sorry.
sorry.
Hello, Engineer Ahmed.
Yes. 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 I'm hearing you.
It's okay. It's okay.
So
Please
no problem.
continue. No, no, no problem.
Okay. So I was saying that the gas viscosity is very difficult to measure in the lab. On the other hand, the correlations, Lee correlations, are very accurate when it comes to estimating the gas viscosity. So we just rely on the correlation to do this. So the final test that I want, so okay. So first, okay, we have this is a viscosity curve. So as the pressure decreases, the viscosity decreases, because basically the viscosity is a resistance to flow. Once you decrease or remove the pressure from the system, it's easier for this system to flow, right? So the oil viscosity keeps decreasing until we reach the bubble point. Once we have reached the bubble point, we start losing some gas. So actually, the gas makes the movement of the oil much easier, right? Because the gas is lighter. So once we start removing gas, the oil becomes heavier and more difficult to move. So the viscosity starts to increase again. So as you look at this curve, for example, if I ask the question, what is the optimum or ideal time to start water injection? Ideally, it will be at the bubble point pressure, because at the bubble point pressure, or just above the bubble point pressure, um, you um, you have the minimum viscosity of the oil. As the sweep efficiency of water flood depends on the mobility ratio, the fractional flow depends on the mobility ratio. So as you have a lower mobility ratio, you have more favorable displacement. So as the viscosity of the oil decreases, as the mobility ratio is enhanced. So ideally, it might not be practical in many cases. In some cases, it can be done, but in other cases, it might be very practical. But ideally, I would start water injection at that point, because at that point, we will have a better sweep efficiency, for example, than this point. Okay. Of course, as we go below the bubble point, we start having gas, so that's a different problem, and also the viscosity increases significantly. So that's for the viscosity. Now for the separator test, or uh, when we do an expansion test, or CMD or CC or CME, it's also the same. So constant mass expansion, constant mass depletion, uh, and differential test, we didn't consider the production conditions. So now, um, again, the whole purpose um, of the PVT properties that we have is to, especially talking about the beta O and the GOR, is to correlate the volumes that you get at these conditions to the volumes that you had in the reservoir conditions. So now, um, let's discuss two scenarios. The first scenario is that you have a separator that's very efficient, so it's going to separate a lot. When it does the separation, a lot of the intermediate components will go to the oil, so you will have a lighter oil and a larger oil volume, and normally you will have less gas. Um, Now we will have another separator that's not very efficient, so some of the oil components just vaporizes and goes into the gas phase. This means that you will have a smaller oil volume, larger gas volume, and also you have a heavier oil, because the lighter components in the oil just had moved to the gas. So basically, the intermediate components, like, can sometimes go to the gas, can sometimes go uh, to the oil, depends on the separation efficiency. Of course, we want these intermediates to go to the oil, so we want the most efficient separation. What does it mean to have the most efficient separation? It means you will have the maximum oil volume at the tank, which means the lowest formation volume factor, or beta O. It means that you will have the lowest GOR, because again, some of the components have moved um, from the gas to the liquid. So the liquid volume increased, the volume of gas decreased, so GOR will decrease, and you will have a somewhat higher API. So now we have like run several separator conditions. Okay, this is a two-stage separator in all cases. In some tests we can run three or four separator stages, depends on the conditions that you will do in your field. So if you are designing a facility, you will do many separator tests to choose the best condition. If you're not designing a new facility, you will just do the conditions that represent your facility. Sometimes you have more than one production system, like a high pressure system versus a low pressure system. So you can run a separator test for both of these conditions, and then you can produce if you have more than one train, you can just produce your system on one or the on the best one. uh, if that's available, because again in many cases it's not practical to do that, so you just go with what you have. Yeah. Okay, so as you see here, for the first case we start as the bubble point, because at this is below the bubble point you start having gas. Then you start the second stage for separation. The separator pressure is 4200 psi. Then you move to the standard condition. As you see here, the total GOR is 547. Okay, this is the total GOR. The formation volume factor is 1.47. Now, for the 160 psi, you have a 565 GOR, 1.45 beta O. For a separator pressure of 90 psi, uh, you have a GR of 572 um, and a bit of 1.46. So as you see, you have the lowest GR for the 160 psi, okay, and you have your minimum beta O. What does it mean to have a minimum beta O? It means that if you have let's say that you have a beta O of if you have a certain volume in the reservoir, this volume would be reflected to a more or larger volume of production at the surface, because less oil volume will be lost to the gas. So you will have a beta of 1.45. It means that for every barrel of oil, if for every barrel that you have at the surface, you would have like 1.45 barrels in the reservoir. 1.47 for every barrel on the surface, you have 1.47 barrel in the reservoir. So you need more reservoir volume to have the same surface production. Okay, when you flip that upside down, you have a constant reservoir volume. So this case would be, and that case would be reflected on less surface production. So let's say that for that case, the number not correct, but I would suggest any numbers. If you have 1 million barrels in the reservoir, you can have in the surface maybe here 600,000 barrels. Maybe here you will have 590,000 barrels. Here you have 595,000 barrels. So you will have more reserves actually in that case. Okay, so this is one to choose. That's the first thing. The second, the second thing is we didn't consider these values in our test, in our PVT test. So we had the CCE and the differential test. We estimated the formation volume factor and the GOR, but we didn't consider these production conditions in our test. So, for example, if you have two fields with the same reservoir fluid, for the first field you produced at that condition, the non-optimal condition. The second field you produce it as this condition. Should you have the same formation volume factor for both fields, or you should have different formation volume factor for that field? Of course, you should have different formation volume factor. Similarly for the GOR. So the both fields have the same exact reservoir fluid, but this one is producing at that condition. It will have somewhat a higher GOR than this feed that's producing at the lower at the optimum condition. So of course the GR will change, but we didn't consider this in our previous test. So that's why we do something that's called adjustment. Okay, we have the adjustment for the we have the beta O adjustment and we have the RS adjustment. So we do the adjustment for the separator condition. Okay, so basically this is the equations for the adjustment. So the basic idea it's not exact, but the basic idea is that okay, we will take the trend of the CCN differential test. Now we have a beta O at bubble point. That's like the beta O at the bubble point. We have this from our differential test, and we have this value from separator test. This represents the beta O at the bubble point for this separator condition. So we shift the beta O curve based on that. So basically, we have it's not exactly that, but it's just to capture the idea. We shift the beta O as the formation as a bubble point instead of having 1.59 for the optimum conditions. This value will be 1.45. So we make like a correction or adjustment factor and just shift the whole curve. So we have the adjusted beta O curve. Which value you should use for the separator test? You should use the values that you actually use for production. So for example, if you are producing at this condition, you will use this value for the adjustment. But if you are using for practical reasons, you couldn't use the optimal conditions and you use any different conditions. So just go with the actual production condition. Let's say if we have this is like this beta O represents our actual production conditions. So we'll use this value for the adjustment. So instead of using this curve, we'll generate another curve that represents these production conditions. Similarly, we do something similar to the RS. We do this adjustment. So basically, we have the RS from the differential test, and we have the RS of separator test. We get like a correction or adjustment factor, and then do some shift or a change in these curves. It's not exactly a shift. It's just like it's a correction. So basically, this is the basic idea. So in this way, we would have considered the production condition. We have taken account of the production condition in our PVT data. So as we go back, we have, okay, I'm sorry. Instead of going there, I'm going to the report. So we have here, you see here, this is a summary table for the report. You see here we have two columns for the formation volume factor. The first column is the unadjusted column. The second column is the adjusted column. It's adjusted based on the separator condition on the ideal separator conditions. Okay, if you have a different separator condition, you will make the adjustment based on that. So this is the adjustment value, adjusted value. That's the table that you should use for your material balance, for your volumetric calculation, for any reservoir engineering calculation. You shouldn't use the original table because it didn't take into account the production conditions. You should use the adjusted table. Similarly, we for the RS curve, we should use only the adjusted table. Okay, that's one that we use for everything. MBAL, simulation, volumetrics, whatever. Okay, so just keep it in mind. So if I want to calculate the volumetric calculation, this is the beta O that we will go for. The reservoir pressure is 625 psi. So I will take the adjusted beta O as the initial reservoir pressure. If I didn't consider the adjustment, uh, I would have taken the value of 1.415, which is significantly different, and will have a large error in the reserve. Probably, I think it's like maybe 10 to 15% error. Uh, no, it's or less. Anyway. So it's like if you have 10% error. So if you have like 100 million barrels, you would have instead a 90 million barrels of in place just by selecting the wrong value of the BTO. So this is very important to consider. Okay. Okay. So this is a PVT report. Okay. Um, okay. So now I have given you like a brief summary on the PVT. It's the procedure time is not very long. It's only 1 hour. I have gone through the PVT report, the sampling process, the type of sample, different tests that we do in the PVT, especially in black oils, or certainly okay. The CCE differential separator test, the importance of separator test, uh, PVT adjustment. Okay, I basically have been going through some of the basics. I didn't try to go into anything deep. I just have been trying to have some overview over the basics. Um, you know, so you can read the PVT, understand the workflow, PVT report, understand the workflow. Uh, so when you do your exercises or check any data, you have better understanding of that data. So hopefully it have been a useful session. Okay. Um, this is my first time doing this type of session, so I don't know if this is some sort of interaction, if you can ask questions or not. So uh, okay, I am so
Thank you,
I
Andrea.
did.
Thank you for
So
this wonderful
is this an
session.
interactive session? Can they participate or ask questions?
Yes, I can enable them to open the mic.
So if
So
anybody has
thank
any
you for
questions,
this wonderful session. It was really fruitful. I enjoyed it a lot. So it's time to receive the attendees' questions. So you can either write your question on the chat box, or you can simply unmute yourself. Let me enable it for you. Okay, you can unmute yourself now. So it's your time to participate. You can ask whatever you want.
so no questions.
I think there is no any questions. So let's wait for like 2 minutes. Maybe they are writing them.
I think there was a question here in um, sorry, how to measure the gas viscosity.
Yeah.
So for the gas viscosity, I'm not familiar with the procedures in the lab. It's measured in very few labs. In the industry, we rely on correlations. Basically, we use a specific gravity of the gas or the composition of the gas. We go to there is Lee and Carr correlation. We use that correlation to estimate the gas viscosity. Regarding uh, the lab measurements, we don't do that in the industry. There are few labs who can do this, but I'm not familiar of those procedures. So, any questions?
I don't think so. So thank you, Engineer Ahmed. So this is all for today. Uh, and again, thank you for this webinar. It was really fruitful.
Okay,
And thank you all OPA interns for attending. See you in our next sessions, inshallah.
sure. Okay, thanks. Thank you.
We have a last minute question regarding the data we have. Oh, it's not related to the session. It's related to the internship. So I will answer them on the internship group. Thank you, Engineer Ahmed. You can.
Okay. Okay.
It's all for today. Thank you. You can leave now.
Bye.
So regarding the data we have, we select which one we should use. Hello, Jalal. You can ask your group mentor. Um, he will tell you everything you need to do so. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for attending, and see